Hello everyone, my name's Bev Lazarou. I'm a Senior Project Officer with the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Program. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I'm coming to you from beautiful Tharawal country in the southern part of Sydney, and I'd like to pay my sincere respects to elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. Thank you for the invitation to speak at the forum about the work of the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Services, the WDV-CASs. Just a little about my working background. I've worked in the field of domestic and family violence for 30 odd years in women's refuges, supported women's housing services, a WDV-CAS as a manager for about 13 years when the program first started, and for the last 14 years at Legal Aid within the unit that oversees the services across the state, the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Program. And my role in that unit is a mentoring support role and also providing training for workers across New South Wales. I'm going to talk a little bit about domestic violence work in general, briefly then about the transition post-lockdown back to face-to-face work with clients. Okay, in terms of background for the program generally, it's funded by New South Wales Government and administered by our unit within Legal Aid. There are 27 WDV-CASs across New South Wales, and they provide services to women and their children who attend all local courts across New South Wales in relation to domestic and family violence matters. Our unit provides oversight of the program generally, contract management for the service providers who run those CASs, and training and mentoring to WDV-CAS workers to ensure consistent and effective service delivery across the state, hopefully. In our team, we have a policy arm and a practice arm, of which I'm part. And so we have mentoring officers within my team that provide assistance and support to the workers on the ground. WDV-CAS has also organised safety action meetings as part of the Safer Pathway response to domestic and family violence across New South Wales. And that's an extra layer of service provision since Safer Pathway got underway at the end of 2014. I'm going to talk about that very briefly towards the end of the presentation. So in terms of the purpose of the services, it's to address the legal and social needs of women and children who've experienced domestic and family violence. Our services don't provide legal advice or representation directly. We're referring out for that, or we have practitioners that work with our services. Some of our workers are legally trained, but they don't work as solicitors in doing this work specifically. We assist women and their children to negotiate the court process, obtaining legal protection via apprehended domestic violence orders, sometimes apprehended personal violence orders, and I'll explain that in a second. But the court process is a maze of confusion often for people. People have never been in a courthouse before they experience these sorts of matters, so very difficult to negotiate and understand. We also provide referrals, we advocate for women and provide information in relation to their ongoing needs. WDV-CASs don't case manage their clients except in 2 locations. We provide case coordination and we're referring out for people's ongoing needs. Just in relation to the volume of work, I've just got that stat on the screen so that you can see that it's a very high volume. So in the last financial year to the end of June this year, we assisted over 55,000 clients and they received over 330,000 services. So very high volume. Contact is not usually ongoing for a long period of time. It's primarily through that court process after the police have become involved, after someone reports, through that process, and some limited follow-up after that, depending on the individual needs of the client. So who works at a WDV CAS? There's a full-time manager, sometimes an assistant manager if the service is a larger service. We have a safety action meeting coordinator, a SAM coordinator, that's also a full-time position. We have a number of domestic and family violence specialist workers. And then we also have specialist focus workers who are working directly with more vulnerable groups of clients. Specialist focus workers, they're employed as well as the generalist domestic and family violence workers, but their focus is more on working with those vulnerable groups as they're listed on the screen. So to note as well that for Indigenous women, we have a full-time Aboriginal focus worker at every WDV CAS. In those other groups, it will really be dependent on the demographic in that area as to whether they would employ someone to work with those other specific groups. Women with a disability, older women, younger women, LGBTQ women, and that also it doesn't include, but I've also added to that non-binary, because if someone identifies as non-binary but they wish to engage with a service that's primarily for women, we would absolutely provide a service to those people as well. And of course, women from multicultural backgrounds, including refugee women. So in terms of the work with clients, it involves initially receiving all domestic and family violence referrals from New South Wales Police via the Central Referral Point, which is an electronic platform. So since the introduction of Safer Pathway, the electronic platform sends every domestic violence matter that the police have been involved in through to a WDV CAS. And that happens at the end of that officer's shift, whoever's dealt with that matter. They would effectively press a button. All that information would be sent through to the WDV CAS closest to where that woman lives, and it's done via postcode effectively. So no people at that point. It's purely an electronic platform that spews out the information to the area that it needs to go. We also would welcome and encourage referrals from other services and people who self-refer. That would generally be people who've used the service before. But that electronic platform can only be used by police and local courts, although we get very few referrals from local courts. But generally, the information from police comes through there. All other referrals would need to happen in whatever means you use to make referrals, but from your service to another service. So it might be generally via email, a particular template or form, or it might be by phone. So whatever mechanisms you use to make referrals in, if you want to refer to a WDV CAS, please do so and use whatever means that you normally do. We would be assisting women considering seeking an apprehended violence order. So sometimes women just want to know some information. They're at that point of making some decisions. So a phone call might be made to a WDV CAS to ascertain what that means. What is an AVO? And so workers would be talking to people about what those options are. And generally you can go through the police for an apprehended domestic violence order. That means reporting it at a police station, or the police are called and they apply for that application. Police applications always involve the person being represented by the police prosecutor as the matter goes through court. Private applications can always be made as well through the court registry. So if women don't want to use the police and they want to make a private application, they absolutely can. Once the application's on foot, the service is the same, or the process, sorry, is the same. But for police applications, the prosecutor would represent the client. For private applications, they would need to organise a solicitor, and a WDV CAS can help people to organise that. But for some women, they feel more comfortable going through the court registry to make that application, and they certainly can do that for domestic matters. So police applications and private applications. The two kinds of AVOs that are on foot are ADVOs, which are domestic matters, and APVOs. So sometimes we would assist women in apprehended personal violence orders, which involve non-intimate relationships. So it might be the case that a person is seeking a relationship, so they're stalking, intimidating someone. There's never been a relationship, so you can't take out a domestic violence order, but an apprehended personal violence order might be taken out in those cases. We would still assist those women. We would assist other people in non-intimate relationships that need to take out orders if it was a neighbour dispute or work colleagues. If that person, the victim, I should say, is elderly, has special needs, has a disability, we may get involved in those matters as well. So in terms of advocacy for clients, again, we would get involved in criminal charge matters where there are charges being laid by police in relation to that domestic violence matter, as well as an AVO. Or it might be that we're supporting a female defendant in an AVO or charge matter where at the discretion of the manager, it's considered that person is actually the victim, because in some cases those women are not identified correctly at the time of the incident. Police might attend an incident and that male person might have a scratch on his neck that's been caused by her trying to take his hands away from her neck. Sorry, scratch on his hand, I should have said, because he may have had his hands around her neck, and she's trying to drag his hands off. The police arrive, he's got the injury, she's misidentified as the offender, and can sometimes be charged in those circumstances. So those kinds of things, if they're brought to the attention of the WDV CAS, they would probably take that person on as a client. There might also be cross applications where the police have taken an order out for a woman, but the other side has gone to the court office and taken out an application against her privately. So in those cases, again, we would support that woman in that cross application where she's effectively the defendant. There are also applications that sometimes go to the district court on appeal. So if their view is of one of the parties that decision in the local court hasn't been considered properly, or they disagree, they can appeal that matter, and it has to go to the next level up, the next jurisdiction, which is the district court. So in ADVO applications, our services would also provide support to women in those situations in the district court. We don't get that many of those matters. So the kinds of services that are provided by WDV CAS, before court, at court and after court. So at every contact with a client, workers are assessing the threat, the safety of that person. We know things can change very quickly in relation to these matters. So every time workers have contact with a woman or with a client, they would be checking on what's happening for her currently, the current circumstances, what are her wishes currently, every time they're on the phone or they see her at court. They would be providing information, non-legal advice and referrals, usually warm referrals to other services, so that a woman doesn't have to be repeating her story over and over again. If they're unable to make that warm referral, making sure she's got the accurate information that she needs to make that contact herself if she prefers. Ensuring clients receive legal advice and representation, and that might be in relation to a private application where someone needs a solicitor, or also sometimes when women are at court on an AVO list day and they're in the safe room waiting for long periods of time, having a solicitor, access to a solicitor to provide advice about any other legal issue that she might face, even if it's preliminary advice, is also very useful. One of the main tasks of a WDV CAS in relation to AVOs is making sure that the conditions of that AVO are appropriate and meet the needs of that individual client. So when that contact is made by phone or when they have contact with that person at court, they would be ensuring at every point that those conditions are what they need. If they need extra conditions, maybe the woman wants to reduce the conditions. So a big part of the job is making sure that that AVO is useful, so it's going to be usable for her. Preparation for hearings. Another part of the work that's really important, and mostly that's done via prosecutor clinics that clients can attend, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Support for victims at hearings also, if that's possible. Our WDV CASs generally are not funded to attend hearings on a regular basis because it's a great drain on resources, especially worker hours. If they're sitting at court all day waiting for a hearing to get started that sometimes doesn't get started. So in country areas or regional areas, probably CASs do more of that. In metro areas where the volume's higher, they don't always have the time to attend hearings to support a client, but will if they can. Or if someone has particularly high needs, they will try to attend or refer them to another service for a worker to attend with the person if they can't. Support for victims at hearings might also involve sitting near her if she's really anxious and worried and having to give her evidence from the witness box in the courtroom in front of the offender or the defendant. So sometimes we can ask the court if the worker can sit close by her to give her some support and lessen that anxiety somewhat. Limited post-court follow-up is really what I was talking about before. Like, we're not case managing our clients except in the two locations that don't affect the northern region, and that's Campbelltown and Wagga, where we have funding for case management workers. But generally, CASs will be coordinating those cases and referring out for the ongoing work. And of course, the extra layer is safety action meetings for matters that are at the high end, the serious threat matters. We provide the Secretariat support for those meetings and run those meetings in collaboration with the police. Just a quick word about the Domestic Violence Duty Scheme, the DVDS. They are solicitors who work for a CAS on an AVO list day. And they provide representation and advice to clients. Those solicitors are funded by legal aid, and they attend court on a rostered basis, and they come from a panel of solicitors that's applied and been accepted by legal aid as domestic violence duty solicitors. They're not at every court. I think they're at about 25 courts across New South Wales. And they work to the WDV CAS manager or the person running the list at court on that day. They don't work independently. They work for that period of time directly for the CAS and for the CAS clients. They are experienced or should be experienced in criminal law matters, family law matters, and domestic violence matters. They should have a good understanding of domestic violence and its dynamics and the complexities involved in those kinds of relationships. So those solicitors, where they operate, and they may operate at a number of your courts in your area, they provide legal advice in general to all WDV clients. In private applications for AVOs that go through the court, there's very few of those, because I think about 98% of applications are still police initiated, so very few private applications through the court registry now. But in those matters, the solicitor can provide advice and represent those clients. They also might be giving advice to victims and defendants in cross applications. And they'd be negotiating with defendants and their legal representatives for the person they're representing, so negotiating conditions of AVOs, etc. So quite a crucial role on a list day where you've got a solicitor working with the CAS, because clients can access them to get advice, preliminary advice about a whole range of things: family law matters, debt matters, any kind of civil proceedings, stuff in relation to the children generally. So it's a good opportunity for women to get some information when they can at that early stage. So in terms of the operation at court, pre-court contact is the way we go now, really, since Safer Pathway. Those referrals are coming through the system. The WDV CAS is required to make contact with those clients that come through that electronic platform by the end of the next business day. So if the referral comes through on a Friday afternoon, because they don't work weekends, they would need to have attempted contact by the end of Monday. If it comes on a Monday, obviously the end of Tuesday, etc. And they're required to make 3 attempts at least to contact that person. Most CASs are making more attempts than that anyway, but the first contact is generally by phone, and they would be ascertaining, making an assessment of the safety of that person, the current threat, talking to them perhaps about their AVO that might be coming up at court. They're difficult calls to make because they're cold calling those clients. The client's not expecting the call. The worker doesn't know whether they are still in fact living with the perpetrator. She might be at work, the kids are around, it mightn't be the best time to have a conversation. So they're calls that require quite a lot of skill, and it might be in that first phone call that you're just making arrangements to talk to the person for the second call when it's a more suitable time to talk. So once they've made that pre-court contact, and then if there is a matter on foot to go to court, and pre-COVID, when women were attending court, they would usually come in, be directed to the safe room and speak to a WDV CAS worker to discuss their circumstances and the conditions on their AVO. Got to make sure that the conditions are suitable for what's happening for them now going forward, for themselves and their children, if there are children. If there are any requested changes to the AVO at court, they'd be noted, and they might be changes that add, where they want conditions added on for further protection or greater protection, or they might be asking for some conditions to be dropped because they want to re-establish the relationship, or there might have been some changes in the circumstances of their living arrangements. So there could be a whole range of things happening from when the incident took place to when the matter comes to court to change what's needed on that AVO. So all the reasons for those changes, if there are to be any, are noted. The domestic violence officer is then advised about that, and then they will in turn liaise with the prosecutor that's in court representing the person if it's a police matter. So the police domestic violence officer negotiates with the defendant as well before the matter's mentioned in court to talk to him about what's being requested on the AVO. If he has a solicitor, they'll talk to the solicitor around those conditions. Police prosecutors advised of any changes, as I said, before they mention the matter in court. So usually before the matter goes into court to be mentioned, everyone on both sides knows what conditions are being sought. The woman can either wait in the safe room if that's her preference. Many people don't want, find the courtroom quite intimidating, especially if the offender or the defendant is there and his, support people around him. So she might choose to wait in the safe room, and magistrates are usually pretty good about that if they know she's at court. Some women also like to wait in the courtroom and watch the proceedings. They want to feel that they're part of what's going on and listen to it directly. So that can be a choice of the client. But after the matter's mentioned, the woman would go back to the safe room if she was in court and wait until the offender or the defendant went into the court office to get papers or leaves the court precinct so that we can arrange for her to exit more comfortably. So again, whilst the matter's at court, the WDV CAS would be providing appropriate referrals for that person if they hadn't already done so in the previous contact by phone. But again, they'd be checking on her current needs. So in terms of hearing, for an AVO, really important that clients are prepared if possible, and that would be via a domestic violence prosecutor clinic. And contact with the police officer in charge, the person who took the report or the statement from the client originally and prepared the matter for court. I'll talk about prosecutor clinics briefly in a second. A short conference on the morning of the hearing is also useful if that's possible with the prosecutor. Prosecutors often don't know which matters they're going to be running until the morning of. So always useful if there's time to have a short meeting before the hearing starts to see if they need to get any further information. Support would be provided to the victim when giving evidence if that's required, as I talked about before. And if there is a remote witness room within the court precinct, and if it's appropriate, if the client would like to utilise that, you can make application through the registry to use that room so that she's giving her evidence separate to the courtroom, but it's being fed directly in. So prosecutor clinics are a really good initiative and a collaboration between the police and the WDV CAS. They run in various ways depending on the numbers in that area, but generally they're a group situation. They run at the courthouse if possible, because that means if there's an empty courtroom, that group of people, those women, can be taken into the courtroom and familiarised with the court environment and who sits where, etc. So that's very useful. And a prosecutor will talk to them about the process of a hearing. After the group session's finished, usually those clients who are at that clinic can talk to the prosecutor who's there one-on-one about their own matter, if they've got any questions. Usually people do gain a lot from just being there as a group and hearing from other people as well, but they run very effectively in terms of preparing people. They haven't been running since COVID has kicked in, but hoping that they will start to get operational again as soon as we can. Usually happen monthly, and the CAS would have a calendar for the year in terms of dates, etc., and where they're located, hopefully at the courthouse. We find that when clients attend these clinics that they are much better prepared in terms of giving evidence, and therefore, the outcomes are more positive. People have also expressed more satisfaction with the system because going to the clinic gives people a greater understanding. So even if the matter's not successful, they're still feeling more satisfied with the process, if you like. And they're also more likely to report future incidents if they leave having had a hearing and understanding, more what it was all about. So just very quickly about Safer Pathway. It is a New South Wales government initiative, been operational since October 2014. and I am a massive fan. I think it's a great way to deliver services to women where it has reduced duplication, where agencies are working in a more collaborative way together and not so much in isolation, and it's more coordinated. We can make sure that the people in most need are prioritised. And of course, at the top end, the safety action meetings mean that those very serious matters are given consideration, and all of the agencies are around the table to develop a safety plan for that person. There are 47 safety action meetings across the state. They're all organised by WDV CASs, and SAM coordinators attend those meetings and provide the organisational or secretariat support. New South Wales Police chair the meetings, usually the crime manager, and the meetings are usually, they are fortnightly in each location. That's just a quick slide showing the 4 components of Safer Pathway. The safety assessment at the beginning of the process that police do, and then our people do as well. That central referral point where the referrals go through. The local coordination point at the CAS where the referral lands, and then they make contact with the client, and then the safety action meeting for the serious matters considered at serious threat. Information sharing legislation feeds all through those processes to allow for people to share information from their agencies or services where it's appropriate. So last one, COVID. We are really in a sort of that in-between stage, I suppose, in terms of return to face-to-face service delivery. Courts and Tribunal Services is the organisation that we liaise with in the Chief Magistrate's Office in relation to restrictions being lifted or changed, and what that means for people going back to court, that is our workers and the clients, and legal practitioners, etc. So it seems, we get multiple memos, I suppose, every week in terms of what's happening. Things are changing fairly rapidly in that space, and we're going with it as best we can. We hope that WDV CAS face-to-face service delivery will gradually return to normal in the next couple of months. We're hoping in December people will be getting back to court face-to-face, and safety action meetings as well. But really, in terms of court, people need to understand that arrangements need to be made locally at their various courts, because court sizes are different, safe room sizes are different, the volume of people is different in different courts. So it's really up to that registrar and the coordinating magistrate at that court how they wish to manage the return, because it will depend on social distancing requirements, the sizes of those rooms, to see how they can manage that, the size of their courtrooms as well. So even though direction is and guidance is offered from a higher level, the final decisions around a return to court and face-to-face work will rest locally, depending on what's happening at those particular courts. Safety action meetings, the same at the moment. We've got some back face-to-face fully, some are half online and half face-to-face, and some are still fully online. And again, that's really dependent on the space that they're operating out of for those meetings. Many of them are conducted at police stations, so it depends on the size of the room. But again, we're hoping early in the new year, safety action meetings will be back more fully face-to-face. So that's the end of my presentation. There's a slide there with my contact details on it. Very happy to talk to you absolutely about anything WDV CAS related, or anything that I've talked about today. Feel free to give me a call or flick me an email. And I wish you well for the rest of the rest of the forum. I hope everything goes well, and Merry Christmas, everyone, when we get to it. Thank you.